Environmental policy has become increasingly important in the European Union. It covers topics as varied as air quality, agriculture, and climate change, and is reflected in the Green Deal, the European Environmental Roadmap. The environmental issue is not new to the European Union. In the face of environmental degradation and awareness of its global repercussions, the EU has gradually gained competence in this area. The Directive, Birds, of 1979, which concerns the conservation of wild birds, can in this respect be regarded as the first building block of European environmental policy. More formally, the Single European Act of 1986 provides, for the first time since the beginning of European integration, for specific competence of the EU in environmental matters. This policy then entered the field of codecision, now the ordinary legislative procedure, with the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. Another important step was the Treaty of Amsterdam in 1997. It is the latter that recognizes the principle of sustainable development that meets present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, as defined by the Brundtland Report of 1987 and further elaborated at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. Finally, more recently, the 2007 Treaty of Lisbon adds a new objective to the Union's environmental policy. It is the promotion, at international level, of measures to deal with regional or global environmental problems, and in particular the fight against climate change. The EU's environmental and climate objectives. European environmental policy is based on Articles 11, integration of environmental protection into the definition and implementation of Union policies, and 191 to 193 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. The 8th Environment Action Programme, which guides EU environmental action for the period 2021 to 2030, has 6 main objectives. It includes the rapid reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation to climate change, making progress towards an economy of well-being that gives back to the planet more than it takes from it, circular economy, the search for zero pollution, the protection of biodiversity, as well as the reduction of pressures on the environment and climate related to production and consumption patterns. Over time, the European Union has also set itself increasingly ambitious quantified commitments. As part of the Green Deal, its new environmental roadmap initiated in 2019, it has set itself the goal of achieving the carbon neutrality by 2050. In force since July 2021, the Climate Law translates this objective into law. The text also raises greenhouse gas reduction targets from -40% to -55% by 2030, compared to 1990 levels. The law also establishes the creation of a scientific advisory council, composed of experts judging the conformity of all European legislative initiatives with the ambitions set out in the Green Deal and the Paris Agreement, an international climate treaty that entered into force in November 2016. European Environmental and Climate Action. Initiatives to combat greenhouse gas emissions. Presented in July 2021, the Fit for 55 package consists of a series of legislative proposals from the European Commission to achieve the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030, compared to 1990 levels. Among these initiatives, a carbon border adjustment mechanism, often compared to a carbon tax for production from third countries, or the end of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2035, definitively adopted. The EU's GHG emission reduction targets include the establishment of a market for rights to pollute, or the EU Emissions Trading System, EU ETS. Created in 2005, it caps the overall level of emissions allowed in the EU and, within this limit, allows industries to buy and sell emission allowances as needed. Its extension to the maritime transport sector as well as the establishment of a second carbon market for road transport and construction are part of the July 2021 proposals. The reform of this system, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and the Social Climate Fund, were finally endorsed by the European Parliament and the Council in April 2023. These three initiatives are interdependent: how to impose a carbon tax on goods from non-EU countries while allowing those produced on European soil to benefit from rights to pollute, free of charge. The EU now plans to remove free allowances from the carbon market in 2034. The Social Climate Fund, for its part, must give a boost to households in difficulty as part of the ecological transition. EU funding for the environment. Europe also acts by financing environmental projects in all member states. First of all, through the LIFE program, it is its main instrument for the environment and the preservation of nature. It is subdivided into two pillars, the environment and climate action. The LIFE program has a budget of €5.4 billion for the period 2021 to 2027. For example, it has supported 50% of the preservation of Hermann's tortoise in the various. It also supports NGOs, such as BirdLife, which works for the preservation of birds, or Pesticide Action Network, which advocates for the replacement of pesticides in favor of ecological solutions. But the environment is increasingly integrated into other areas of EU policy. The New Horizon Europe research program, for example, is partly geared towards environmental issues. This logic of greening is the same for cohesion policy. The European Regional Economic Development Fund, ERDF, thus participates in the transition to a low-carbon economy. A Just Transition Fund, JTF, has also been set up with the new 2021 to 2027 budget, in order to cushion the economic and social consequences of the ecological transition in the territories most dependent on fossil fuels. In the event of a major environmental crisis, such as oil spills or forest fires, the EU also provides assistance through the EU Solidarity Fund. And vis-à-vis third countries, it acts within the framework of development aid, of which it is the world's largest donor. Agriculture, soil, pollution. Among the objectives of the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, is also the greening of agriculture. This implies in particular environmental obligations for farmers. Other financial means are provided for this purpose by the European Fund for Rural Development, EAFRD. However, the results of this policy were deemed insufficient by the European Court of Auditors in 2021, while the future version of the CAP, 2023 to 2027, has given rise to some reservations in this area. Improving Europeans' diets is now also on the agenda. In May 2020, the Commission adopted a farm-to-fork strategy to ensure a fair, healthy and environmentally friendly food system. For example, it provides for reforms in the areas of pesticides and animal welfare. On June 22, the European Commission presented a proposal for a law on the restoration of nature aimed at repairing the damage caused to nature in Europe by 2050. It also proposed reducing the use of chemical pesticides by 50% by 2030. The EU executive also intends to tackle deforestation caused by the marketing of several raw materials imported into the EU, soy, beef, palm oil, cocoa and coffee, as well as wood. Finally, the European Union's action also touches, among other subjects, on the issue of air quality. Several directives set concentration standards for many pollutants responsible for cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, such as fine particulate matter or ozone. The European Commission has proposed to review these rules in October 2022, wishing to strengthen the repair of damage, the effectiveness of sanctions and public information on air quality. The European Environment Agency, for its part, recently pinned the European standards in this area. EU air quality standards are less stringent for all pollutants than the levels of the World Health Organization guidelines, the agency said. In 2021, 97% of the urban population was exposed to concentrations of fine particulate matter above the health reference level set by the WHO, the rapporteurs add. Skills. Environmental policy is a shared competence between the European Union and the member states. Most decisions are also taken under the ordinary legislative procedure. The European Commission, where the Commissioner for the Environment sits, makes proposals for directives or regulations. These are then examined, amended and adopted by the European Parliament and the Council. Other actors take part in the decision-making process or are consulted by the European Commission. These include the European Economic and Social Committee, NGOs, associations of individuals and scientific experts. In this context, the European Commission has notably launched the European Climate Pact, designed to promote discussions among Europeans around this theme. Also important is the importance of the European Environment Agency, which carries out studies and collects data to inform decision-makers and the general public about the risks of environmental damage. Principles of action. The basic principles underlying European action on the environment are: the precautionary principle, a concept born at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 and incorporated into the Acquis Communautaire by the Maastricht Treaty. Now mentioned in Article 191 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, it aims to protect against unpredictable and uncertain damage. He is notably at the origin of international measures on the ozone layer, 1980, and a 2001 European Directive on GMOs. However, it is rarely used in areas that do not directly affect the health of Europeans. The principle of prevention, incorporated into the Acquis Communautaire by the Single European Act in 1986. This principle is intended to protect accessible and foreseeable damage. It is at the origin of the Convention on Civil Liability for Damage Resulting from Activities Dangerous to the Environment in 1993 and therefore of the 2004 Directive which concerns the prevention and remedying of environmental damage. The principle of correcting pollution at source. It consists in seeking to go as far upstream as possible, directly preventing the source of pollution. This treatment at source is considered preferable to the downstream erasure of the consequences of pollution. The polluter pays principle, incorporated into the Acquis Communautaire by the Single European Act. Polluters must bear the cost of the pollution for which they are responsible. They must therefore pay a sum of money to remedy the damage they have caused. To these principles is added a new one, within the framework of the 2021 to 2027 multi-annual budget and the recovery plan, that of do not harm, i.e. the need for a European policy not to harm the environment.